Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Newcastle Institute, new venue. I know we'll get some feedback on it, but we'll see how it works tonight. So far, it's great to see everybody here at the Newcastle Yacht Club. We really appreciate their support of us. We are on the lands of the Awabakal and the Warramai people, and particularly the clan of the Mullabinba people, who occupy these lands around here. As you know, tonight we've got Evan Lucas talking about generational inequity. I think it'll be an interesting and challenging night. One of the basic tenets of our generations past has been that we do better for the next generation. We hope that the next generation has a better quality of life than the current than we have. That has happened for generations past, but I think if we ask young people today, they wouldn't agree that it's happening at the moment. And there's lots of data, and I'm sure Evan will talk about it, that indicates why there's inequity between the generations and possibly the need for reform in terms of taxation. One of the challenges of having policy reform is that the policy makers and politicians have to make policies for the best of the majority of the population. But sometimes those reforms affect us individually, and we often speak out about those individual harms. I guess the challenge of economic reform, and we've seen various attempts at economic reform and tax reform, is how we can think more broadly, not just about the impact on ourselves, but the impact on the broader community. And currently we probably have a tax system that's set up more in favour of, and there are some people here that aren't in this group, but for people my age and some of your ages, I would call them baby boomers. So I think that what we're expecting tonight from Evan is some challenges to our thinking about what's needed in terms of economic reform to address generational inequity. Now, Evan is an economic futurist, a big, strong focus on behaviour. Many might know him from ABC, News Breakfast and a Project, and numerous podcasts and other media, writing in some of the papers as well. I think tonight he will challenge us. And I think being challenged about our thinking in terms of where we're placed in the context of policy is a really healthy thing. And it's certainly in line with the views of the Newcastle Institute to have that rational and respectful debate about the issues fronting our community today. So I would like to welcome Evan to here tonight to challenge you, and I hope you can say to us at the end, that was really challenging. Thank you.
So when I do this, I start at the back of the room. Hi, I'm back here. Hey, how you doing? Why do I start back here? Why am I here to talk about humanism as well as economics? Is because you expect me to stand at the front of the room and to talk to you, which is what I'm going to do. But right now, you are uncomfortable. You are deliberately uncomfortable because I've made you uncomfortable, and I want you to be uncomfortable because your internal biases, your internal basically understanding of what tonight's going to be is that I'm there, not here. And immediately you're having to strain yourself, you're having to turn around, and already you're sitting there thinking, this is not how it should be. Your internal monologue is thinking that. And I want you to do that because economics, and all economics is the collation of data of what we are doing as a city, Newcastle, as a group, the Hunter area, as a state, New South Wales, as a country. What are we doing? How are we doing it? What are we doing it? And why are we doing it? Because that point, once you start at that idea, you can then start to understand that actually all economics is behaviour, and how we go about with behaviour and how we actually make the decisions that we make are based in biases. I mean, I always start with two things, and I'm going to come to the second one, but the first one I always start with is one of the biggest financial catastrophes, let's call it that I have ever seen is sunk cost fallacy, if you know what that is, but the best way it's described to you is the Concorde fallacy. So Concorde, the aeroplane division, was started in about 1952 by the British government, which then convinced the French government to pour billions of dollars into a program that started out of the Second World War, which was starting to get supersonic aircraft. I know, let's turn it into a commercial airline. It took 26 years to actually build the first prototype. It cost $1.8 billion a year, US, in the 50s. Not now, in the 50s. By the time it was actually commercially active, not viable, it was going in 1978. It then lost money every single year until the horrendous event of 2002, where Air France obviously blew up, and British Airways didn't cancel until 2004. The total expected number spent on that, 1.8 trillion US dollars from start to finish. By the way, you're allowed to laugh tonight. I'm not great at jokes, but I'll try. So, I want to talk about what that means, because that's yesterday. I want to talk about today. I want to talk about tomorrow. And I want to talk to you about beyond and what the beyond looks like. Because again, Concorde is the first thing to start about. But the next thing I want to start through this is something a little bit different. I want you to think of a fruit. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of an assumption, because I know the statistics, and I'm going to suggest that you were thinking about this. Now, the reason you get nuts is because 6.2 out of 10 people will think of an apple. So there will be different in here. There'll be bananas, there'll be oranges. What I didn't ask you, what's your favourite fruit? Because I promise you the one you initially thought of was not it. And this is where it also comes down to the economics and to all this. Lexicon is a massive part of this. Language and bias is a massive part of the decision making that we do with money every single day, because that's how we think. That's what we do. Now, why do I use an apple? Well, maybe it's because physiologically it's technically the most nutritious fruit around, only just, but it is. Maybe it's that, so maybe biologically we know that the apple is the thing that we should be eating. There's another way to look at it, which is that the apple actually is in our psyche the most. So part of behavioural economics is what we call thinking fast and thinking slow. And most of our thinking is fast in almost everything we do. We want to seamlessly transition through our day without having to actually stop and think. Why do you go and buy a cappuccino? Why? It's because it's what you know. It's what your favourite thing is. Although you might find that if you changed and got a latte, it tastes just the same or might even be better. But that's your reaction. That's fast thinking. Right? And it's not just as it sits here, it's the default sort of thing. You know when I'm being hostile, that I talk really loudly, or that I'm being soft. And it's just that innate internal part of you. The slow part of your mind is when you actually have to do something. Now, obviously, this one's talking about the fact that, parking in a narrow space, your mind turns on. But it's also about when you make decisions, you have to slow down and start genuinely looking at the data or the information or the discussion that you're having, or that some idiot like me is sitting here telling you something. Because that's what happens. So let me give you another example that I'm going to go back to again, just being a little bit annoying to you guys out there, particularly looking at the audience around here. I got asked before about shares. I'm not going to talk about shares tonight, but what I guarantee I'm going to get a response to on this is, how many people in this room own CBA shares? CBA, Commonwealth Bank. How many of you own CBA shares? Yeah, I figured, the majority. And most of you would have got them probably in 1994 when it floated. Here's the thing that I love asking about CBA. You thought about selling them? That response is what I was hoping for as well. Telling you to sell your CBA shares is like telling you to cut off your left arm. Like it dead set is. And it's incredible because it's such an easy investment. It pays you $3.75 now a year. That's a lovely little dividend. You get it grossed up as well, and we'll come to all that kind of stuff with tax. But again, you're looking at it from the income side, rather than the fact that if you look in your portfolio, I would also almost guarantee CBA monsters everything else if you're holding individual shares. I remember looking at a client's portfolio and 92% of it was CBA. Have you thought about how that looks? Because that is also the issue that I have at the moment, not just individually, but collectively as a state and as a federal government, we tax. We have a CBA inside our tax system as personal income tax. And I'm going to come to that. And it is, not only is it getting larger, they want it to get larger. So, the other reason I talk about apples is that it's actually because subliminally it's in your face all the time. It's in culture, it's in art, it's in religion, it's in history, it's everywhere. And when you're super exposed to it, your body does absorb it, like osmosis. It comes into you and it thinks about it. And the reason an apple is so fascinating for me as well is because it's something that also, I believe, the first ever behavioural economist on the planet was associated with. And who is that? Well, it's this gentleman. Who's this? So Isaac Newton. Now, why do I say Newton is a behavioural economist and not a physicist? Well, because back in Newton's day, if you were a behavioural economist or worked in finance or anywhere near money that actually got you ahead in time, it would probably get you a long drop and a short stop. Because the king would have probably taken your head, let's be honest. So he hid what are some of the most fascinating behavioural economist studies out there in physics. Because if you use his first, second, and third law of physics, they are almost perfectly equatable to behavioural economics. Capital at rest will remain at rest. Capital in motion will remain in motion. The whole concept of obviously growing not just everybody's pie is to make sure that it is moving, that we are investing in business, we are investing in ourselves, we are investing in the economy, we're investing in the country. When capital is actually used correctly, it continues to move and moves in a right direction. When it doesn't, and you put it under the mattress, it gets eaten up by inflation. And that's money inertia. It is one of the things that I get to talk about over and over. I do an entire talk on that point alone. The amount of people that are frozen with their money is incredible. Not just people, councils that are frozen with making an investment decision. Because it's easier and it's safer if it doesn't move. How hard is it to change? I mean, I'm here deliberately to challenge you about changing the way that we tax, about how much tax you guys should pay, about how much the economy should be using their money. That inertia is a force that it doesn't want to move. Second one is something Paul Keating knew better than anybody, which is the compounding return of an investment is equal to the investment mass of that investment times by the compounding rate. If you keep increasing the mass, the compounding rate will massively increase as well, and therefore your nest egg, or should I say eggs, because you should be diversified, gets bigger. It's the whole concept of superannuation, to invest for the future and to force you to save, to add more mass to the income that you will get in the future. Because the larger amount of capital you have, the more and more it can grow under compound interest, and as, well, he's at least accredited for doing it, but Einstein said it's the 8th wonder of the world. For a reason. Compound interest is incredible. The best person to look at with regards to compound interest is the complete total wealth of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's been investing for 73 years. The man is 94 years old, and he didn't hit $1 billion until he was 67. He's now 94, as I said, and he's worth about $210 billion. And if you look at his chart of his wealth, it was exponentially takes off from about 67 when he hit the critical mass and poof, off he went. The last one. This is the one that I love talking to government about because they get really angry. For every taxable action, there's an equal but opposite taxpayer reaction. Think about that. Genuinely think about that. So let me give you a great example of good intentions going to the doldrums. The tobacco excise. We have created Australian-styled prohibition. The whole concept of the tobacco excise, not a tax policy, it's a health policy. It's trying to stop us from smoking by making it too expensive and either slow you down or get you to stop completely. The thing about it is that it's been indexed to inflation. Inflation in the last couple of years has gone through the roof. And now all of a sudden, it's so expensive that, don't forget, we still as human beings want choice. If I want to smoke, I want to smoke. It's now $87 for a packet of 25 cigarettes. It's 107 in some capital cities to get a 50. So what are you going to do? You turn to the illegal trade, don't you? I mean, that's what's happened. Not only that, look at it from the flip side. If you work in criminal activity, particularly, let's say, moving drugs, and you have a choice between moving Class A drugs, which could get you 20 years in jail, or a fine for moving illegal cigarettes, what are you going to do? I mean, this is exactly what's happened. And part of the reason why at the moment Melbourne, where I'm from, Sydney as well, are having firebombs thrown at pretty much tobacco marts is because the illegal trade of tobacco has gone through the roof because of a tax policy that's forgotten that actually for every taxable action there's an equal but opposite taxpayer reaction. Yeah, let that sink in. It's also the same with why Australia now, per capita, has the highest level of trust funds on the planet. I mean, that's staggering. Why are we making so many trust funds? Because we pay personally at a ridiculous level of tax. So, let me move on to today. And what I want to talk to you about today, which is the region that we're in. I want to use you there, just let that sort of marinate, filter away for a bit. I'm going to come back to it. Because I want to talk to you about what's going on here in this region. So this is from the 2021 census of Newcastle and also Port Macquarie. So I was trying to also include the Hunter, but apologies, I couldn't get it completely. But there are two pieces of demographics that catch my attention immediately. First, the median age. You're 4 years above the median age of the rest of the country. And if you read Bernard Salt's lovely article in The Australian, you're actually 6 years above the highest level of population now in the country, which is 34-year-olds. So that's point number one. You do have an ageing demographic in this area. Point number two is the average number of people per household. That fascinates me because this and what's going on there is a COVID phenomenon and a behaviour that we've got into post-COVID. The other thing to look there is pretty much around housing and what the median household income is, because if we look at what's going on in the area around Newcastle, about where we're employed, if you ask somebody outside of Newcastle or outside of the Hunter Valley where the most employment in this part of the world was, they tell you it would be mining. And this tells you that is absolutely not true. All right? Most of them are in household services. Now, by household services, that is things like plumbing, construction, but it is also around areas of service, care, and that. I mean, if you do, and I've got to be honest, look around the room, care is obviously going to be a really big part of what's going to happen in the next 20 years. Not being rude. But it is. And then if I also have a look at the median house price and what's going on in the housing market in this part of the world, it's also very fascinating, is that actually at $950,000 on the median price, you're attractive, but you are getting expensive. Compare yourselves to the rest of regional New South Wales, and you've got another thing that this area needs to think about, which is that competitive advantage that you have a beautiful outlook, you definitely have employment, you have very interesting employment, but you are expensive. You've got an ageing demographic, and then you get to the thing that I find the most fascinating, which is that since COVID, we don't want to live with each other anymore. We at the moment have a fascinating trend that has started, and it's not just in the regions, it's across the whole country, that the amount of people per house is falling like a stone. If you want to fix the housing crisis, add 2 people to every single house. If we did that, the million houses that we're currently missing would disappear. I mean, that in itself is a staggering statistic. It's actually 1.7 extra people per household, and the current housing crisis would almost evaporate. But we are not doing that, and we don't want to do it. Why don't we want to do it? Well, first and foremost, for those of you that have lived in the houses that you currently have for the last 15, 20, 30 years, you like living there, and so you should. It's your home. It's your nest. It's where you've got all your memories, your experiences, your trends, everything that you love about the home that you're in right now. That's a personal want, and you absolutely should want that. That is part and parcel of being who you are. There's nothing wrong with that, yet you're being told by my generation, for example, get out, because we want your house. Now that's not fair, because the other part is that, okay, if you did get out, where are you going? And this is the catch with the housing crisis as well, is that the houses that should be there for you don't exist, because you don't want to move out of the area you know. That's where your friends and your family live, where your experiences, where your cafe, where your local area is, where the place that you go to work, where you walk, where you take the dog, the beach. That's all there. So if I downsize, is the house that I want there? Well, probably not. And so this is the catch that's going on with the housing climate, is that time doesn't stop. You can't stop time. You can gain time, but you can't buy it and stop it. And so the catch is that demand is always coming, because people like my age and younger are always coming up behind you, and demand for houses that are probably 3-4 bedroom on half an acre, or whatever it happens to be that you want in this part of the world doesn't exist, because instead of 10 of you moving out, only 1 of you is moving out. But there are 10 families like me that are trying to get into it, because we can't stop time. You know, you go from being single to a couple to possibly a family, from 1 to 2 kids, maybe 3 or 4, depending on what you want to do. You are constantly putting pressure into the system, which is why, if you have a look at what's going on, population growth has been sort of this thing that people have poked numbers at, right? Look at the population growth that's happened since COVID, this massive whipsaw back, et cetera, to the average houses. The catch is blaming immigration is not the problem. The catch is that, as I said, we don't want to live with each other, we don't have the houses in the area that we want to live in, and then at the same time, you then have this problem, which is that you have a demographic problem, which is that, again, using the census data, the 25 to 34-year-olds are the ones screaming the loudest for a good reason. Their ability to get into the housing market is getting harder and harder. And what this chart is telling you is that that age group, as of 2021 census, only 43% of them were getting into the market, whereas the rest of us were doing a lot more. Now, why do I say demographic sweet spot? Well, 2021 was 4.5 years ago since we did the census. 34-year-olds now make up, as I said, the largest population of it. And if you look at the 35 to 40 group, it jumps up to about 62%. So they are getting in, it's just later. And this is the question that I'm asking, is that strategically, this part of the world has an offering to be made. As I said, yes, it's slightly more expensive, but the job opportunities are probably a little bit larger. The community and the overall sprawl of the place is better than most other regional parts. And you've now got a part of the population that wants to get in and is going to get in. They're just having to change their mind about where it was going to be. Can you attract them? Can you actually bring them here? And so I'm going to skip through this quickly because this is really boring, but this is a whole heap of charts about inflation. Yeah, cool. This is a chart about what has happened from the RBA. Yeah, cool. This is the one that matters. So RBA rate expectations for the next meeting in July because of how slow the economy is growing at the moment, has now gone to just over 84%. So that'll be the third rate cut of 2025. And if you look at this chart again, what it's telling you is that by Christmas, the expectation is that the cash rate will be about 3.1%. So that means we've probably got at least another 3. That includes the one in July. Possibly, some people are even forecasting another one on top of that. That'd be 125 basis points out of the cash rate. Very, very exciting if you're looking into getting the home loan apart and looking into getting into the market. But in saying that, what that's going to be is it again ramps up pressure on the younger generation who are telling you that they're having to pay $950,000 for a house here in Newcastle. They have a salary that's nowhere near the level it was before. And then they're also starting to talk about their savings and where their savings are going and how they're going to get there. So here's the challenge, right? Does anybody want to answer what superannuation was for?
Provide retirement savings.
Yeah, there's one part of it you're missing.
And their dependents.
What was that? Replace the pension. Replace the pension. This is what is forgotten about superannuation and where I get to fit into it, which is the behaviour. The reason I started with that CommBank comment at the start about selling your CBA shares and it's like cutting off your left arm, it's the same thing with superannuation. You are and have been working your entire working life, and then maybe at 65 if you've retired at 65 or now at 67, you are told to go from accumulating wealth to start using it today. And it's a cleave. Again, it's like telling you to cut off your left arm. You have gone from growing this egg and it looks beautiful and it looks lovely and the numbers on it are incredible and I've been working so hard from it, contributing 9% of my payments for the last 30 years. And I've got up to an X amount of dollars and then tomorrow I'm supposed to start spending it? How dare you? How very dare you? That's my egg. But it's that. It's not there to do anything else but to support you. It's there to take you away from having to be on the government, which is replace the age pension. Because the age pension is in the 5, what I call the magic 5, biggest drags on the budget. Interest, age pension, healthcare, NDIS, defence. And if you listen to that, 2 of them face an issue around an ageing population. Age pension. NDIS are thrown in there as well, and aged care. All right? And so you're told to start using it. But the catch is that I don't want to use it. So what it's become is now an intergenerational wealth transfer. Again, thanks, I'll take it, but it's not mine. And I don't want it to be mine. And those in the generations below, millennials, even Gen Xers, we shouldn't be getting it. So what my proposal has been is that I actually agree with the $3 million cap. I agree with it. The unrealised gain part of it, that's a catastrophe. That shouldn't happen. But superannuation has become such a vehicle for wealth creation and wealth transfer that it's completely now dividing those that haves and those that don't. Because, again, second point of Newton's laws, mass. If you're contributing now 12% of your pay packet to superannuation every month or every fortnight or whatever it happens to be, and you're on $150,000 versus somebody on $50,000, compound interest, mass. The acceleration of your wealth goes through the roof. Not only that, the government's worked out that actually we want to help you get your superannuation up because we think it's going to take the age pension off you, which is great for us in the future. We'll offer you more and more benefits. Throw more in. You can now throw $27,500 a year into superannuation. And instead of being taxed at 37% or 45%, we'll tax you at 15%. We are also one of the only nations on the planet that doesn't tax pension phase. So once you guys retire, zero tax. And it's baked into our thinking. That one pension phase. So once you retire and your superannuation is done accruing, once you go into pension phase, you have zero tax up to $1.6 million. Pension phase. Which also means that you can claim back things like, in this country we have franking credits, so the 30% company tax that a company pays, you own a share in that, you can claim that back. It's what we call gross yields. So your 5 to 6% in your CBA shares becomes 9% because you also get 30% tax back that they had if they're doing 100% franking. So all of a sudden you've got a group of people that are paying zero tax, and that's like I said, I was going to challenge you, and I know you're not going to like it. Zero tax with a nest egg that's probably at the moment, and I'm going to bring this up so that I make sure that I get this number right because I think I'll get challenged on it. This is the catch though, is that superannuation for baby boomers in particular wasn't full earnings potential. You didn't start working when superannuation came in. You were already in the market. You were already working, the majority of you. So what, came in 1992, thereabouts, probably 93 actually, when Paul Keating brought it in. Yeah. There was, but it wasn't the same accreditation, right? And so you weren't earning the full amount. And this is the catch that I always get back when I talk about this, is that super, particularly for boomers, you didn't get the full time in the market. I did. As soon as I started working at the age of 14, I had a superannuation account and away it goes. But it didn't happen for all of you, and I get that. But as you can see, the majority still have a pretty reasonable nest egg. The other thing that you've got to take into it, and why this gets really tricky and why there's a lot of defence about it, the inertia that I'm getting pushback on, is that let's take today's retirement age, which is now 67. The average lifespan of an Australian female is 87 in this country. The average lifespan of an Australian male is 83. It means that if you're an Australian woman, you have 20 years from your retirement to live with the money that you've saved and worked your butt off to use. So no wonder there's so much resistance to it. Because what I'm also saying there is something horrid that nobody wants to think about, is the end. Because when is that? Nobody knows. Nobody knows when the end is. And because of that, watching your nest egg get smaller and smaller and being drawn on leads to fairly visceral responses for good reason. Because how am I going to live if I've got nothing left? I have to fall back on the pension. And this is the catch with the superannuation system, is that it is inequitable. But $3 million is a lot of money, considering that the average single person in Australia this year needs about $47,000 to live. Now that takes into the idea that you own your house outright, you're not paying a mortgage on it, so put that to one side. And if you're a couple, it's $72,000. So at $3 million, you're not going to run money out. In fact, I almost guarantee that you'll be handing some of that over to your kids or whoever else that you want to hand over. So taxing it at 30% makes sense, because we now need to get to this. This is what governments do when they don't want you to understand something. Right? This horrid chart, horrible chart, and what it's trying to show you is that sort of aqua green is the total revenue the government gets from personal income tax. And what you can't see on it, because of how horrid it is, I deliberately copied and pasted this out of the budget papers to show you what they're trying to hide, is that it's 62% of all government revenue. 62% of the federal government's revenue forecasted in 26-27 is from people working. If you take into it company tax, and again, there's a deliberate reason why they've put it at the top, so you can't add it together, it's 78%. If you work in asset management or farming or anything of regards to understanding diversifying risk, having two things that are the only way that you make money is a massive problem. The government doesn't think so. They love it. I was massively surprised, I'm going to say something quite political here, that Stephen Kennedy, who's just been appointed to the Prime Minister's office as the head of the Prime Minister's office, as Treasury, head of Treasury, said this is fine. It is not. And I know last year you had Ken Henry come and talk to you about this. And he was absolutely the leading voice that this problem was coming like a freight train in 2010, and it is here. The government is walking into a structural problem that it will now have to deal with, which is that the burden on the economy and the burden on people is getting younger and younger. Bracket creep has not been fixed. Every single time that your wage goes up, it gets eaten by tax. And they haven't changed it, despite what they tell you with the changes to the stage 3 tax code. It's all for the stage 1 and stage 2. They have not fixed it. Young people are going to pay more tax in their lifetime than you guys ever paid in the entire time that you were around. The other thing about the $3 million tax thing, again, compound interest, it's been worked out that a 22-year-old starting today, with the likelihood of the increase that they'll have through their career, plus the accumulation and compounding, that they will enter into that $3 million bracket in their lifetime. So not only are they paying the income tax on top of it, they'll then pay the 30% tax on superannuation, and away you go. So the one to look at, see that little grey bar at the bottom? That's the tax take for superannuation. It's why the government's going after it, and they should be going after it, because this is a problem. It's a structural problem that needs to happen. And as much as it hurts you guys, and I get that, it has to change. Because if it doesn't change, the things that you want from your economy and from your country and from your nation will not be affordable. Because the next thing to then look at is what tomorrow brings. What is tomorrow? Because if tomorrow is unaffordable because of the way that we currently move with our structure, what are we going to do? So, just want to start before we go any further with this. Getting back to my humanism point of view, don't forget the number one thing by Harvard Psychology, by the University of Stanford, and by the New England Journal of Medicine, they've found human beings' number one want is autonomy. It's the ability to feel that your life, its activities and habits are self-chosen and self-endorsed. It is absolutely fundamental. When you ask that question, what do you want? You want the ability to do what you want, when you want, how you want. That's what you want to do. That's why you've saved. That's why you've worked. That's what you do. It's so you can do what you want, when you can, when you want, how you want. And it's becoming quite the trend in Gen Zers. Gen Zers now are actually basically blogging this. They are loving to put out there on TikTok or on Instagram, this is how much money I have down to the cent and how it's growing, because I now have the ability to do what I want, when I want, how I want, and the autonomy that they need. Because they don't think they're going to buy a home. So what they're doing is that they've got other priorities. You've got to start tapping into attracting that, because the tomorrow is the interesting thing. Again, I want to go back to what's happening in the employment part of space of this part of the world. So this I pulled out again from the numbers that came out of the census, but also out of the ABS, and which to come back up on that one, because I think what's fascinating about this is that have a look at the change in healthcare and social assistance that's happened since 2018-19 to 23-24. Look at the second from the top. You've actually lost employment in mining. You've lost employment in information technology. That's not unsurprising. But the other one is agriculture, which I find fascinating, because this is the other thing that does quite well in this part of the world, is agriculture. How do you get more farmers back here? How do you actually attract and make it more appealing to the younger generation to do that? Because again, go back to autonomy. And the reason I'm going to keep barking on about economy for this next part of my talk is that you are talking about choice. You are talking about, I think they want this, when realistically they want that. Because this is currently, according to most of the local government websites, this is what the current economic drivers are of Newcastle, of the Hunter Valley, of Port Macquarie, the ones on the left. And then the ones on the right are the strategic papers saying what those three regions believe 2030 will be the economic drivers of their areas. Have a look at them. They're quite fascinating. Clean energy, advanced manufacturing, port logistics, expansion, healthcare, education, tourism for Newcastle. The clean energy one's fascinating. Everybody thinks they're going to be the next clean energy player. I'm yet to see it. I mean, it came out yesterday that hydrogen is now going to cost 4 times more than what was expected in this country. 4 times. The thing that's interesting about particularly hydrogen, the Japanese are the ones to watch on this. The Japanese have been playing with hydrogen for about 30 years. And the more and more I talk to them about it, the more and more they come back and suggest that it's the holy grail. That it is just not going to be reachable. Because you've got to remember, hydrogen is about 10 times more flammable than petrol. It's the smallest atom in the universe. It's very good at escaping. It requires a lot of work to keep it under pressure, so you get lots of leakage. Economically, it may never be viable because we just can't get there. Now, the advantage of human beings, we get smarter and smarter as we keep continuously making sure that knowledge is the thing that we hand down. The beauty, I think one of the greatest inventions ever made, the printing press. Because the printing press was allowed to actually keep knowledge and hand it down. If you can keep reading, keep handing knowledge down and building on knowledge, you'll get there. So maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am, because hydrogen would be a game changer. Absolutely. But the Japanese, probably right, it's a holy grail. But this area believes it's the future. Again, the other one to look at is advanced manufacturing. Why do we keep thinking manufacturing is this absolute glory? Why? The President of the United States of America is doing that at the moment. He's literally thinking about America in the 50s with this rose-coloured glasses, that if I bring back American manufacturing, it'll change the country and everybody will be happy again. If you actually have a look at the charts, in the 1950s, American manufacturing was in decline. Why? Because Japan was on the way up. Right? We now think about Japan as an absolute superpower and something else, and China's taken over. We forget the 50s, Japan was taking over manufacturing in the US. If you actually also survey Americans, do you want to go back and work in manufacturing? The majority of them say no. I don't want to do that. That's not what I want. That's not what I've gone to university to do or what I've learned to do. They don't want to do that. But we keep going, this is the idea. We're going to manufacture things. Why? We are much better at services. We are much better at offering our intellectual property. We are much better at banking and finance. Why would we try and do something that we're not competitive in? For instance, why did the government invest in psi computing and put an incredible amount of money into quantum physics computing when the Chinese are already well ahead of us? Why are we putting so much money into manufacturing solar panels where the Chinese can do it for a fraction of the price of what we're going to be able to manufacture it for? That's high-end manufacturing. The reason the governments love it is because it employs people. Well, at least they think it does. The average manufacturing job in this country makes up about 6.5% of the total employment in this country. Manufacturing is gone. And I promise you, if you ask your kids or your grandkids, do you want to go and manufacture something? They'll tell you no. So why do we keep thinking it's that? Because it's choice. Right? Human beings, we have told every generation, if you want autonomy to do what you want, when you want, you want choice. And the fascinating thing about choice is that we actually don't want it. Come back to the coffee thing I told you at the start. You are trying to seamlessly navigate the world. That's what we do. Socially, if I start at the back of the room or I challenge you on a question, your whole entire monologue has to start thinking, and you're not seamlessly moving through the world. So choice, as some philosophers will point out to you, it's actually a reaction we don't want to do. And it's something that I find really, really interesting is that, again, if you ask what the next generation wants to do, the ideal versus the reality are different. Now, I hope I've done an okay job of trying to blur out what car this is, but you get it. The reason I want to do this is that it's a fascinating thing about the ideal and the reality. Why do I use this? In 2024, how many people in the age group of the lady in this photo do you think bought a new car? I'll flip it around. How many baby boomers, or what percentage of baby boomers made up new car sales in 2024? 64% of all new car sales in 2024 were baby boomers. How many baby boomers do you think were featured in car ads? right? 94% were Gen Z or young millennials. So ideal versus reality. And this is why I'm asking this, challenging on this point, is that we are trying to build the next part of the economy, part of the world and where we fit into it. We have an ideal about what we think it is. We have to market that ideal because we have to sell it. We really do. We have to sell that concept. We really need to push it. And marketers have a different ideal to financiers, who have a different idea to salespeople, who have a different idea to councillors, to MPs, to senators, to you and me, to boomers, to millennials, to Gen Z. And that's why, again, the reason I want to challenge you is that if you look at the 2030 economic drivers and the employment, there's a mismatch. It's going on in this part of the world. But, and I want to put this out there right now, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong. What we're having at the moment, I would argue, is that the employment is the here and now. It's the easy. This is what I know, so this is what I'm going to do. But as we well know with things like coal manufacturing and coal mining, it can disappear. It can become the previous major technology rather than the future technology. Because that's what coal is. Coal, unfortunately, thermal coal, will become obsolete in the next 25 to 30 years, which is actually, fingers crossed, the hope. So what we need to do is that we need to make the ideal and the reality the same. We need to actually start challenging our young people to understand that the future and the exciting future are some of these things, are the 2030 ideals of what we want this part of the world to be, and actually attracting that. Because if you start attracting those people to meet those three parts on the left-hand side, rather than getting the employment change that we're getting on the right-hand side, then we're on the way. We're on the way to doing what we need to do. Because that's the next part of it. What is beyond? What is beyond? This brings me back to superannuation. When I talk about superannuation, I talk about today, tomorrow, and beyond, which is what I've deliberately done through this. Superannuation is your beyond money. It's the savings for your future. But the thing about it is that beyond could be, for some of you in the room I can see here, could be as much as 40 years. For some of you, it could be tomorrow. Or it could actually be today. And so, with that confusing concept, it also explains why we have conflict. Because we're all at different stages, we're all at different thought processes, we're all at different parts of the whole time continuum. Let me put that into another perspective. Because time is one of the hardest things human beings can work out. If you are 65, I want you to think about what 50 was, or give or take 15 years, wherever you happen to be. I then want you to think about what, if you're at 65, what 80 looks like. And it will seem like a completely different kettle of fish. Because I promise you that 15 years ago to when you were 50 feels like yesterday. The one that I love doing this to is Gen Zs, because they have really low concept of time for good reason. They're very young. They haven't experienced a huge amount of things. So the 25-year-old's the one I love to use the most. Ask a 25-year-old what 18 looks like. They're finishing school, all the stuff that happens with it. Feels like yesterday and the fun that had it. I've got one to follow right over here. But ask that same 25-year-old what 32 looks like. And there is a complete glaze of like, but 32's years away. Well, no, it's exactly the same distance. In fact, you're closer to 32 than you are to 18. Time's always going forward, not going backwards. And so this is why beyond is always part of the conversation about the future. You can't stop time, as I said, but you can gain time. And if we start making decisions now, even if they're just slightly wrong or not exactly perfect, at least you've put your money, your investment, your community out of inertia and into motion. And that it doesn't include just money, that includes thought, that includes ideas, it includes knowledge. Because that's where it's at. Because time heals all. The small mistake you make now will be flattened out by time. Think about some of the biggest mistakes you've made. You will dwell on them more than anything that you'll do, because you won't concentrate on all the correct decisions you make. Think about at work or whatever it is that you do, you will always remember the wrong thing rather than the right things, plural, that you did. Human nature, fight or flight, you will always internalise the wrong because you lost something. Losing something is much more acute to humans than gaining. We just assume gain is part and parcel of life. But we need to start pushing. We need to start moving because we've got to gain time. And that therefore comes down to understanding the demographics, understanding the industry, understanding the economics, so that we can do this. Because this is the most important thing. Knowledge is the power of all growth. By all means, I think we can do what you're trying to do to 2030, but the big key part of that is offering the choice of building the knowledge that they need to do it. If you want to actually move people ahead, if we want to see that dream being realised and arm the future, it's about knowledge. It's not somebody like me. It's about making sure that we understand that the Generation Z, Alpha, and the ones that haven't even got a generation yet are actually given the choice. The 2030, the 2040, and the 2050 future is not just achievable, it's what they want. That's the catch. It's what they want. And again, think about the apple. Subliminally, constantly putting it in front of them becomes an innate choice rather than a thought choice. We can get them to think fast rather than think slow. Knowledge is power, and they will come. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Evan, for making us uncomfortable.
Yeah, I do apologise. I'm actually quite a nice person, I do.
I'm intrigued by a couple of things you said. While you prepare your questions, I'm going to come and ask you for your questions. But I'm intrigued by a couple of things. You know, we always remember loss more than we remember gain.
Mm-hmm.
I read some stuff about people as they get older, and the thing that they regret most in life is not things they did or mistakes they made, but things they didn't do.
Yep.
I should have done this, I could have done that, and I just didn't.
So this is the next fascinating discussion that's going on, is how do you know to spend enough? So this is referred to now as basically gratitude is becoming the trend on what you're talking about there, is that actually understanding that if you appreciate what you have, it appreciates more. And therefore, as long as you are using things that you value the most to you, then it works. And by value is not just capital. Value is time, value is effort, value is belief, value is also, ethnicity and capital. If you start putting those together and add them as a net effect, you can start answering that question. Because for instance, when I was young, and I'll use myself personally here, experience was the most important thing to me. It was more valuable than money. So people go, oh, you could have been at an X position financially, but I don't care. Because I can't go back. I can't sell time, as I keep saying, and go back and go to my 20s and go, I really, really wish I had have gone to the UK or to the Netherlands and did that. But that was me. You are you, I am me. So what you might want, Rob, would be different. But again, there's this new happy medium that is very much growing, particularly for millennials and Gen Zers, is finding happiness in value, and value is everything.
The other thing I just wanted to ask you briefly, when we were preparing for tonight, we got the data about how big the bank of mum and dad is in Australia. It's up there with the big four banks, the ANZ, the Commonwealth, the Westpac, and NAB.
Did you see the data today?
I haven't seen the data today.
I'm just going to interrupt you. Today, the data came out that the Australian housing market is now valued at $11.1 trillion. That's 4.1 times annual GDP. To put that in another perspective, in the US, it's 1.6. So the bank of mum and dad, I'm not surprised, because it has to be there.
Yeah, well, my question was a lot of the stuff like superannuation and everything else is sort of a lot culturally based. From an economic perspective, I can see from an equity perspective that's unfair, but from an economic perspective, what's wrong with the bank of mum and dad?
So nothing. So economically and culturally, I would argue nothing. Why? If you use culture, You look at collective cultures, look at Asian cultures, look at Mediterranean cultures, Middle Eastern cultures. What they are unbelievably good at doing is actually pooling their money in not just the nuclear family or the slightly extended nuclear family, the whole family. And the advantage that that gives, second point, critical mass. So if they have one family member that has a loss, the overall impact on the family is minute. But if you have a loss in the nuclear family, it can be catastrophic. So it's a very Western, particularly very Commonwealth scenario to have the nuclear family and also have a negative connotation to using the extended family for money.
It's getting worse with the number of people in per household just declining.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
even a nuclear family.
Correct, and as I sort of was talking before, is that there's a reason why kids, I mean, even the boomers, you guys knew that with the millennials, they were staying till 23, 4, 5 before they were moving out. There's a belief that what I think they're going to call Generation Beta, they could be there for as much as 30.
I'm keen to get your questions. If you put your hand up, I'm going to come straight to you with a microphone. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's not really a question, it's more an observation of this room.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 75 and I think I'd be nearly the average age here. Do you actually get to, like, organisations where there are Gen Zers and get this sort of message out?
Yep, and I flip it. Right, so instead of aggravating the baby boomers, I aggravate them. For a good reason. Because the other thing about time is that you have had time to accumulate the wealth that you've actively made. And that should be yours. This is the thing that they get out of my house. Well, hang on a minute. They saved, bought, actively managed their money, and they've had 75 years in your instance. Whereas, the other thing we forget about millennials, depending on where you want the cut off, it's either 82 or 80, right? Millennials are as old as 44. And that's what's also lost on this, is that actually millennials were a bit like, well, I am one, they were spending up their 20s. That's good, that's fine. But yes, it means that you're going to have to slightly sacrifice in your 30s and your 40s than probably what your parents did. The other thing that I've always found fascinating with my generation, what I flip when I do this talk to them, is that why the hell do you want your parents' house off the bat? Most of them will turn around and go, I want to buy what my parents had. This beautiful, incredible 3-4 bedroom house on, 250, 3, 4, 500 squares today. And I say to them, but if you go and ask your parents or your grandparents, depending on how old they are, how many houses during their lifetime did they have? Because you guys would have gone through, there you go, 7. I'm pretty sure the average is 3. So they don't, again, short-term thinking today. They want today, now, what you had over 20 years. And that's the other thing, is that time will get them there. They just cannot wait.
You just mentioned the extent of the value of home ownership in Australia.
Which
Is that
scary.
is that productive capital?
No.
So why are we tying up so much of our wealth in non-productive assets?
That question, at the moment, if you could bottle that up, you would have the most amazing PhD. Right? So, bang on. When did a home become a house? And when did the house become the largest asset in your portfolio? That's the question. And so that gets back to Rob's point about culture. That has happened almost subliminally over the last 30 years. It's just been this very slow, very ornate thing that we've come to accept, that the house is now the number one product in my portfolio. And when I talk to, again, I'm going to use your question and flip again. When I do this to housing people, the way I really decide to, excuse the French, piss them off, is to turn around and say, property is not the only way to accumulate wealth. The reason you do so well in it is because it's a geared product. A mortgage is a geared product, it's a debt product, which allows you to 6, 7, 8, 9 times wealth of the house asset to be borrowed. Like, we got at one point to 8 times yearly earnings in borrowing. The risk on that's incredible, right? But it's been accepted because it's how you accumulate wealth. Bang on question though, it is very unproductive. And I was having a discussion with a gentleman before I spoke, and back corner, was around that concept of how do we move away from that negative gearing, right? Again, we're talking about tax problems and tax changes. Probably the start way to do it is that once you get to a certain quotient of housing, you get capped out, right? So by all means, if you want to have 20 houses, you can only negative gear 2 of them, or 3, or step it down to from 100% for the 1, 75 2, 50 for 3, and then every other one from that 0. But the other catch, yeah, right. But the other catch is that the collateral that you can use with that property, plural, right? Even if you've worked your absolute butt off to make, let's say, $200,000 deposit, which is a really good deposit, you then have to compete against an investor that might have 6 properties that can then use the total collateral off those properties to compete against you to buy it. You're dead. Thanks for coming. These are the APRA rules, the changes in policy that need to happen, but Bill Shorten tried to do that in 2019, and look what happened to that. Again, this is, for every tax reaction, there's an equal but opposite taxpayer reaction. If we don't change personal income tax, these kinds of policies stayed in place, and these kinds of behaviours stay in place. Because again, I interviewed Stephen Koulis, who's a really good friend of mine, who used to be the advisor to Julia Gillard. Love him or loathe him, it doesn't matter, but he said something that I actually bought. One of his concepts is raise the GST to 20%. No exemptions, no exceptions. But then basically completely scrap all the other tax probabilities, raise personal income tax up to $50,000, $150,000 and $250,000. Overcompensate those that are at the bottom end to make sure they offset the 20%, and you watch how it works. Basically what Ken Henry was saying, but on steroids. The other way to think about it, again, this is also gets a bit of pushback, was to ramp up the amount of drawdowns on super. So you obviously, when you retire, you're forced to give out 4% at a certain age, 6, 8, so on and so forth. Ramp it up. Instead of taxing inside super, push it out of super. Goes into the economy, stimulates it. Or if you put it into a cash account or whatever investment it is, it's out of super tax policy, and therefore it's back in the real world policy, and it gets taxed at nominal tax rates. It doesn't hurt you as much, it's much easier. There's so many things we could do, but again, politicians are absolutely petrified. Again, love or loathe, doesn't matter. What's happened with the federal election, I think, is probably one of the best things that could happen, whether you agree with the Labor Party or not. The fact that there is now so many of them, they can finally take a risk. Right? Think about John Howard in '98. He took a risk with the GST. Whether you think it's regressive or progressive, he took a risk, he got it done. Yes, he lost at the polls, but he still scraped back in. The Liberal Party is the Liberal National Party is so decimated, they would have to basically get 82% of their current size to get back into government. That's not going to happen. I so hope they take a risk and actually reform the tax system.
We've got a question over here, another one.
I rambled, I do apologise.
I'll just bring the mic over to you.
In fact, more than that, I ranted.
I hope this is not too political, but I was very much amused by Annabelle Crabb's description of the National Party trying to make a deal with the Liberal Party as an episode of The Farmer Wants a Wife.
Oh wow, I did not see that. I've got to read that article.
Thanks, Evan. That's been great tonight. I've always thought the tax system penalised savings for people and encouraged debt.
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that we should be turning around?
Yes. So that's a very good point, right? So you are taxing capital gains, you are taxing earnings at a fairly large rate. Negative gearing obviously allows you to basically have a capital growth and then offset that, right? So I would completely agree with that concept. The thing is, again, CGT, capital gains tax, is a really easy thing to sell. Really, really easy thing to sell to the electorate, to us, that if you're going to make money out of investing, just like you're making money out of earning by being employed, you've got to pay your dues to the society to allow us to build roads and have the ports that we have and the healthcare system that we have. So you're dead right. Economically, productivity-wise, question, definitely. Politically, that is dead.
Evan, do you think there's any chance that they'll tax the balances left in super when you die? Like, if you've got anything left, then you get taxed to encourage us
They do.
to spend
They
it.
do.
They
They
do
do now, but to an increased rate?
Possibly. I mean, again, the question you're really asking there, Rob, are we going to get an inheritance tax?
Yeah.
Right, let's call it what it is. Are we going to get an inheritance tax? Look at the UK. Right, so the UK has an inheritance tax, and it is now accepted, but it took a long time, and it's really, again, quite a burden. Get back to point 3. For every taxpayer action, there's an equal but opposite taxpayer reaction. What would happen, and this I know, in fact, what will happen is that you will bring forward the tidal wave of money that the baby boomers will leave behind. Because instead of getting taxed at the time that you pass away, you're going to start gifting down the line now. And you're going to start pushing money down and doing as much as you can gifting, which is tax-free, and start pushing that into the next generations. So, again, this is the catch that the Treasury Department has to always get around, is that what's the action that this will create? And the reaction will absolutely be the tidal wave, which some value as much as $5.5 trillion from the baby boomers' natural wealth, will start coming into the economy today, if it was to happen now, rather than what's more likely to happen in the next 20 to 25 years. So, again, bring it in, you watch the change.
Question up here.
My first question is just in relation to whether you in fact meant Lake Macquarie when you said Port Macquarie on a number of your slides.
Possibly.
If your research included Port Macquarie versus Lake Macquarie, it's flawed.
Okay.
The other thing is just an observation. I've been building houses in the Hunter Valley now since the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And in my early days, people were quite comfortable with a modest home, and they were quite comfortable to grow that home. Admittedly, land sizes were greater and so on, but as years went by, I've found that people, and especially youngsters, want it all straight away. And that's an observation. 4 bedrooms, 2 garages, 2 bathrooms, you go for it. It takes up so much of their income in servicing the debt that so many separations and divorces follow simply through income stress. I just see that as a change in the attitude of people. That's my comment.
Okay.
Thank you. I live in a modest home, as it was my first home, and I'll be there forever. Unfortunately, I bought a unit, and I regret that decision every day. I wished I bought a house. Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
Do you want to go further than that, if you're up for it?
Oh, I just, like, when you look at houses as investments, so
Yeah.
I feel that I sort of got, I get like pushed into a cul-de-sac of buying a unit because it was the most affordable home that I could buy, because I would go to buy houses, and as a single person, I obviously only have one income to service a debt.
Yep.
I would go and look at houses. Real estate agents wouldn't talk to me because I was a younger woman, but they would rush to talk to my parents if my parents were at the...
I'm listening, keep going.
Yeah, if my parents were there. But my question, just beyond that, I could rant all day about unit ownership, but it's more of a philosophical question of how do we have conversations in our communities to talk about fairness and equity in changing the tax system?
Bingo. Can I put you back up on that one? So, you're talking about several things there. Single people, first demographic. Second demographic, female. Third demographic, your age. The reason I wanted to bring this back up, the level of inequity, unfortunately for women, is still incredibly high. And the behaviour that you've unfortunately seen with real estate agents is the same behaviour that's been going on for centuries, not even decades, centuries. What you can see between the differences here, like have a look at the 35 to 39-year-old male to female. You'll never catch that up because compound interest will always keep the man ahead. The average gap in superannuation in men and women in millennials is currently 21%. And if we want to catch up and make that better, there has to be ways around it. And this is the questions that comes from this side of the room before about how do we make it more equitable? How do we actually make more productive money, get out of housing and into things that are actually going to productive numbers? We need to talk about the other thing is that if we can use superannuation to stop paying the aged care and the age pension system, can we make it a more equitable system that the money saved on that can actually go to why women biologically can't change it, are having children, are getting some form of contribution to super when they're out of the workforce? The equitable position that that would bring would be incredible and would help, you know, all situations. Now I understand that's a little bit different because you've also talked about being a single person. The borrowing capacity issue now is the other part of it, is that banks need dual income families. I mean, this is, again, the questions talking about before, is the difference and the changes that have happened in society, is that it is now needed rather than choice to be dual income families if you want to actually enter into the housing market. And I can tell you right now, I don't have the answer.
I'd just like to agree with the lady that in years past, I've had a good enough income, as good as a married couple, maybe not combined, been in a position to, say, buy a car or go for a loan for a house, but because I'm single, same thing.
Yep.
You're restricted, and you kind of feel like you're discriminated against because, yeah, you've got an income on paper,
Yep.
You've got an asset, but you can't go. They're holding you back, and it's unfair.
Probably the other way to put those 2 points together, and again, it gets back to the question before about capital gains and savings and debt, the way that we use debt. So you're always going to be at a disadvantage because your borrowing capacity is not the same. You're half of a couple. And again, if you're coming around and allowed to use debt facilities to keep buying houses over and over again because of the asset sizes, the couple that can outdo you can't outbeat them. So this is the question, what both of you are asking, and probably what's been part of it, is that who moves that lever? Who has the capability to move that lever? And it's fiscal policy, it's government, right? Which means it comes through regulation and clamping down on certain abilities at certain sizes or what have you. It also is about programs to bring it in. Now, admittedly, they've just created another demand program, but the 5%, 15% deposit on first homeowners that the government's about to bring in, so 5% deposit from the homeowner, the government's going to take the other 15%. It's programs that are trying to address that. The thing about them is that when you flip it back and look in my world, the risk that you would have originally posed that the government's taking on will pop up somewhere over here. And what we don't know is where over there is. Right, so you, again, having worked in banking and done banking, all of that sort of lending, trying to make lending really cheap or hurt certain places, it'll pop up over here in a bond market that we just didn't think. And so trade-offs is what we're playing. And this wasn't the talk to do it, but I'll do it anyway. There is 2 parts to governance: fairness, aspiration. How do you balance fairness and aspiration? And that, depending on who you talk to on the spectrum, will see them in different ways and see the movement in different ways. But that is the conundrum. And it's not a Venn diagram, unfortunately, as much as it would be nice to. It's a question over the far side.
There's one just here first, and
Yep.
then I'll come over to you.
Thanks for the talk. I'd like your thoughts on two, if you like, the cultural theory of how to get rich is to have an income.
What is rich? Okay, yeah,
Well,
cool.
whatever.
Yeah, cool.
The way to get rich in the Australian vernacular is to early on buy the biggest house you can possibly afford, work like hell to pay off the mortgage, and then buy an investment house.
Partly, yeah.
Right? And then buy another investment house, another investment house. And that's the way to get rich. But I'm told that the reality, or I've heard it said that the economic reality is that a better strategy is to spend as little as you are comfortable with on your house and put any other income you've got into the stock market and leave it there forever, so to speak.
Okay, so
Is that true? And if it is true, how do we convince the population that that's what they should do? Buy a small house and put their money in the stock market.
it's true for some. So, I said before, autonomy. The ability to be self-chosen and self-endorsed. The reason I straight away said to you, what's rich? That, if you ask that question to every single body in this room, will be completely different. The question I'd probably ask you is, what's wealthy? What is wealthy? And so the reason I say that, rich is defined as those that have money but don't know what to do with it and they spend it. Wealthy are those that have the ability to actually use their money in a value that they see fit. Which means wealth could be $500,000. It could be $25,000. It could be billions, depending on who you are. Getting back to the next part of the question, which is about building wealth. What you're talking about there's a couple of different strategies that are blended together. One of the up-and-coming things being discussed at the moment, which gets back to the question about negative gearing and debt facility, is what's called rent vesting, where you rent the house that you live in, spend as little on it as possible, buy as many investment properties as you can, negative gear them out, and then build the wealth that way. So, because your own personal house is non-deductible debt, but an investment is deductible debt. So what you described in some respects is that, which is stuff buying my own house, I'm going to rent, but I'm going to buy somebody else's house and put them in it. And then I'm going to buy more people's houses and so on and so forth. And they can pay me the rent on top of it, like a negative gear, all of the earnings I get can go down to zero taxation, blah, blah, blah. Rent vesting. Now, that is what some people want. And particularly, I assume for you over here, you would have seen a lot of that on things like TikTok and on Instagram. It is becoming one of the biggest trends out there at the moment. Yes, it can get you rich. Doesn't mean you're wealthy. Troubling concept. By all means, if that's what you want to do, go for it. The system is there for you.
I suppose my question was, is it better to do that or to put money in the stock market?
Answer would be both. Why? Because again, diversification of risk. I mean, if you look, the average return of the ASX 200 on a total grossed up nature, so total returns, over the last 15 years is about 9.6%. The average return of the housing market, even with what's happened over the last 5 years, is about sort of just touching 8% per annum. Over in the US, the average return of the S&P 500 is currently, for the last 15 years, 14.2%, right? So by all means, put your money into the stock market because it diversifies your risk, you get a higher return. The catch, question before, there's no gearing on it. I mean, you can if you want to, but it's seen as a really bad thing to do, margin lending or something of that equivalent. But we just accept that putting a mortgage on a house, which is the same thing, is okay. Because, again, we can do the question this gentleman asked before, which is that we can use debt as a vehicle to create wealth, despite the fact that it's not actually working. It doesn't allow you to have growth in savings or anything like that. It's just an asset value on paper. Let me go another way. When I talk about this as well, with the difference between share markets and housing, If you came home one day and there was a big neon sign on your house and you'd seen that it had fallen $10,000, would you sell it? Nah. But if you came home every single day and watched the stock market, which is open between 10 and 4 p.m. every day, and you saw your share portfolio drop 10%, you'd definitely think about selling it. It's just a difference in the asset, right? But there's no difference. Right, if it's $1 million house, it's fallen by 10 grand, and $1 million portfolio and it's fallen by 10 grand, why do we have a visceral change to it? So I get your question. The answer, unfortunately, there isn't one, because every single person in here is different, and every single person would have a different view on that question, including me.
Mine was actually a comment. I was actually going to say rent, and so what you've just discussed, but I think there's a further, I guess it's a policy type scenario.
Yes.
We can't rent long term, generally speaking. You know, it's a 6-month, 12-month lease.
12 months, and then it goes month to month, right?
But in European countries, you can rent for, you know, let's just say a lifetime. It feels like a long time. So I think we've got some policy changes that probably need to happen for people to feel secure, because when you're saying wealthy, as in, do you feel comfortable in that space? Not if I'm going to get kicked out in 12 months or I don't know, or there's no security in that, and you can't do those small things that you might want to do. So in your own home, you've got that freedom to, you know, paint the wall, hang the picture, whatever it is. We now can have the pets.
I'm glad you're saying that comment.
But I think, you know, we've got a whole ways to go, and we're pretty backward in this country, to be quite fair.
Yeah, true. I think we're also, compared to some others, we're quite forward.
Yeah.
But your comment also perfectly highlights my point, which is that for you, rent vesting is not something you'd want to do.
Only for that reason, though, because I'm very much thinking that's a really good, you know, and when I was younger, absolutely, but not when you've got children and you've got schools that you're attached to and all of those other things in your community. You can't, you know, it's not easy to move.
So again, that question has an infinite answer. It just does. For some people, it absolutely works. For others, it doesn't.
Yeah.
When is the time that you can and can't do it? How long can you do it for? All of that is why it's an infinite answer and an infinite question. And it's beautiful. And so, again, policy might be there, but as I said, as soon as you start pulling policy levers, something will pop up over here.
Evan, you mentioned about solving the housing crisis.
I tried to.
One method was to increase the size of the households. As a futurist, can you give other methods of solving the current housing crisis?
I can certainly try. Again, one is certainly, yes, increasing the size of housing size. There is clearly an argument that supply is part of it. It's part of the answer, but it's not the full answer. And I think we've sort of been discussing what the future of it is. It is changing tax policy around the inactivity and the productivity that is housing. It's just so low. The catch is that it also employs a lot of people across the country, not necessarily just here. So policy's one, tax is another, supply is another. You've then also got to look at the way that demand is working, as I said before. I mean, the government is, again, doing something it sees as right, and by all means, I think it's a fair thing to try and help first homeowners in, but it's a demand policy, right? You are creating the ability for higher borrowing of people that wouldn't normally have it, and unfortunately for the lady before and the gentleman before, they are the core constituents, and they absolutely deserve the right to get into that. But the risk that it will create, or the increase in demand it's going to create, is not being offset by something else. So where is it supply? Is it changes to negative gearing? Is it forcing properties out? The futurist in me sees all of that as part of the answer. Then it also comes down to the RBA. Now the RBA has got one lever that's doing fine art with a sledgehammer, because interest rates are the only lever they can pull, and it doesn't just help housing, it helps or hurts everything indiscriminately. But it does control regulation, and it does control macroprudential rules. Lending capacity, 3 times earnings, or 3% above the cash rate for borrowing, etc. That might be the next thing also, is that the RBA starts cracking down in prudential, like it saw in October 2021, where it saw the risk, the cash rate was at a record all-time low. Instead of being able to borrow at 1% above the current rate, which at the time was, you know, you could get even as low as 1.6% for a mortgage, they bumped it up to 3%. And thank God they did, because the mortgage cliff that we were hearing about didn't happen. It's because the people that actually bought houses during 2021 through 2023 were assessed at 4%, not assessed at 2%. So thank God that happened. But again, if you flick that even higher, let's say for investors of a certain amount of properties that the macroprudential rules went even through the roof. Can you afford interest rates at 20%? No, you can't. Cool, sorry, see you later. I mean, that's a ridiculous notion, but it works in terms of restriction. All of that is possibly part of the answer, and all of that will be debated by people much smarter than me.
One here, question here.
Thanks very much for your very stimulating talk. I'd like to make 2 quick comments. One is that we're completely and utterly allowing the mining industry to take us to the bank, in that the government is actually paying rebates to the banks in terms of allowing them to get money out of the country tax-free, and also not properly taxing that part of the industry. And that's a major element of income that we are not getting from a very wealthy area. Secondly, is that I watched with great interest when Albanese did his speech at the press club, and it's absolutely going to be a do-nothing session, really, next 3 years. He's not going to be a Bob Hawke who basically, you know, wanted to do adventurous things, or like you said, John Howard. So we've got 3 years of nothing happening, really.
Or Paul Keating. So those three.
Paul Keating is I'm a huge fan of his.
Yeah, so Paul Keating is the godfather of superannuation.
Yep. So the thing is that we can only hope that going into the following election, he will come up with some ideas he wants to put to the electorate that are exciting. Because otherwise, I can't see where the vision going from anyone in the political sphere to where we go forward with any of the ideas we've been discussing tonight.
Yeah, so that's what I said before, is that the fact that they've now got such a large majority, they can take risk. Backbenchers won't like it because obviously their jobs are on the line, but they can take risks to the electorate, which is what Bob Hawke did with the floating of the dollar and the opening up of the economy. Paul Keating did with his reforms. John Howard did. Basically, since we hit the millennium, we haven't had that. The last 25 years have been that.
Thanks, Evan. We have one last question, and I want to look down the camera and say welcome to all the people who are watching online. We have a question from Brian, who says, will an inheritance tax reduce house size? I think the number of people in it, I don't know. I'm not sure what Brian
people
means.
in it, or?
That's what he's asked.
Okay. If I take that in terms of, will that mean that it will reduce it more because they have the kids in the family can move out?
Maybe.
Possibly. I mean, again, the other way to look at it is the question before about rent vesting and all that kind of material. What we don't know is the reaction could be, do the kids get the house and then the kids pay for the parents to move into a rented property that they can have? That is guaranteed because, again, it doesn't have to be worried that the kids are actually paying the rent because there's no mortgage on the house. And the rent that they would have paid, they pay for their parents. That's certainly been tested before in terms of that theory. Does it get transferred? How does it get transferred? It's, again, a theory, a huge hypothetical question. Love it. But yeah, you could see, the futurist in me can see that what it would be the house gets passed to the kids, the parents move around the corner, and the kids pay for the rent as a mortgage.
Thank you so much, Evan. Can you please join me and thank Evan for making us feel uncomfortable?
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's a lot of fun.
Just before you go, let me just flag a couple of things that are coming up. Next month, we're looking at the future of education, and particularly higher education. We've seen what's been happening in the United States, and the corporatisation of education, where education has been turned into a business rather than a service. is something that we need to be talking about. But then in August, we have the Chief Executive Officer of the Federal National Rail Authority coming to talk to us about the high-speed rail. Well, you know that they've done there's a lot of work being done on this, and so it'll be very, very interesting to hear what the Commonwealth Government has to say about this. So I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Can I thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Evan.